So, hello and welcome back to Life Rewired. I'm Rob.
And I'm Ashley.
And today we have a very special guest. Her name is Natalie Mackenzie. She's joining us from the UK, and she is the brain injury therapist. Hello, Natalie.
Hello. Thank you for having me.
No problem. And I know it's a little late in your area, isn't it?
It is, but I actually got the time wrong because I forget about our hours difference with British summertime. So it's not as late as it was going to be.
Oh, awesome. Well, thank you anyway for staying up late to talk with us this evening. So,
You're welcome.
Natalie does cognitive therapy. Did I get that correct?
Cognitive rehabilitation therapy, yes.
Cognitive rehabilitation therapy. So Natalie's going to tell us a little bit about what she does. And Natalie, the floor is yours. And after you're done speaking, Ashley and I will ask you some questions.
Yeah. Thank you. Yeah, thanks so much for having me. It's been great to hear about what you're doing here and huge success. Well done. Well done for doing it. So I have worked in neuro rehab my whole career. So I'm coming up for just over 20 years of working with individuals who have survived brain injury. So my background is psychology. I have a psychology degree and a master's degree in cognitive neuropsychology. I'm also a cognitive rehabilitation therapist, certified brain injury specialist trainer, hypnotherapist, just because, and also an ADHD coach. One of my specialisms is brain injury and neurodiversity as well, because it's a bit of a complex mix. So I also, my main day job, away from the brain injury therapist, which is what I'm known as online, I'm the founder and director of a brain injury rehab service in the UK, where we provide specialist cognitive rehabilitation to individuals who've had brain injury. So most of my clients there tend to come because they've had things like car accidents, they're sort of medico-legal, sort of maybe had compensation claims. But over my career, I've worked with a whole spectrum, so from concussion all the way up to severe. And I'm also the trustee of a brain injury charity in the UK too. So I do my fair share of working with individuals with brain injury, but I do a lot of charity work and advocacy and awareness to raise awareness about the impacts of brain injury. So as a cognitive rehabilitation therapist, we come in to work on function and cognitive skills. So rebuilding the skills that have been lost or affected as a result of a trauma to the brain. So, and we work with a wide variety. So it might be acquired brain injury, traumatic brain injury, strokes, accidents, hemorrhages, sports injuries, aneurysms, all sorts. And all, of course, are very different. Everyone's individual. Each rehab program is individual. So we work primarily on what the individual's goals are. It's very person-centered. There's not a cookie cutter guide to doing it. So obviously there are systems and strategies that we recommend, but it really very much depends on the individual's needs. So as a cognitive rehab therapist, I work on things like education around an individual's brain injury, to work on things like insight and awareness, process training, which is practicing cognitive skills, functional training, which is doing them in real life. It's all very well doing things on paper and practicing, but how do you transfer that to real life skills? And then things like strategy training, scaffolds, putting in prompts and using aids. Again, very much dependent on what the individual's cognitive needs are. So I work across memory, attention, executive function, visual processing, all sorts. Anything to do with cognition is what we do. In a nutshell.
Awesome. Yeah, you do it all.
Yeah, it's very well, as you know, it's such a complex dynamic brain injury, and it needs such a wide holistic approach. It's, and another area that I do, another specialism of mine is fatigue management. I do a lot around that. So I wrote the fatigue management journal because so many individuals, it's one of the big things that people who don't have access to rehab or big teams, multidisciplinary teams, and they're kind of stumbling around trying to figure out what on earth to do. And one of the big overriding clouds is the fatigue. So it's one of the things that I come in and work on from the outset, is looking at fatigue and fatigue management, because it's, as you know, a biggie.
Oh yeah, everyone that's got a brain injury, that's the probably the biggest thing we have in common is the fatigue.
Yeah. And it just feels different for everyone as well.
Right.
Everyone shares it, but it shows itself in different ways for everybody.
Right.
Um, but what I find is that so many people just don't know that it's a thing.
Hmm.
You know, it's that whole you don't know what you don't know, and it's only when you speak to others that you understand what it's actually about. You know, some people are just like, it's a change, some are it's fogginess, some it's exhaustion. It's so very different, isn't it?
Yes. You hit the nail on the head with something you said about the brain injuries all being the same but different. Because
Mm,
we're, you know, I think you're also in one of the groups as well, the brain injury support groups that we're all in. That
yeah.
is a biggie that everyone, it's funny to see how this person's got this person's got this, but it just like all kind of intertwines.
Yeah, there's commonality, isn't there? But so I'll work with, I mean, I've worked with hundreds of clients. And when I'm doing my because I do a training program for all of my staff, but we can have 20 individuals all with severe frontal lobe brain injuries. But and you look on the training and you look on the slides, and there's a long list of all the things that you'll see in an individual with a frontal injury, but you have 10 of them in a lineup, and they all just exhibit it in a completely different way, because everyone's an individual prior to a brain injury.
Hmm.
So ergo, it's going to be different post brain injury. And that can be, this is where a lot of people that don't know about brain injury really miss things, because it's like, well, it's not typical, it's not a typical presentation, or that's not what you would expect. But it doesn't take into account what an individual was like prior, what version they were prior to the brain injury.
Right. We have an online support group, one of the brain injury groups that I'm in, and there was a neurologist in there. And this is funny that you said that because this almost mirrors what he was saying. He said you could line up 5 people and hit them in the exact same spot, and they'll all exhibit different symptoms.
Yeah.
You know,
Yeah.
something that is just weird.
Yeah, because like I say, I always think that, not think, it is the case. Your brains are like your fingerprints. Everyone's brain is individual. It's wired slightly differently. Its experiences are different. Its skills are different. So of course you have an injury to it's going to be completely different for everybody, which is hard, because obviously groups are amazing, but they can be a place of confusion also, because it can be almost like, oh well, but that doesn't work for me.
Yep.
So, and that can put people into, well, why not? If it's worked for one person, why doesn't it work for me? So again, that understanding that it is so different for everyone, and you can't just assume that because this process has worked for Frank, that it's going to work for Tracy, or Tracy's version is going to work for Fred's version, or anything. It's just, that's why it has to be so individualized.
Yeah. Exactly. It's kind of like going to a drive-through, and not every menu on the drive-through is going to fit for that person. You have to specifically, sometimes you have to order off the menu.
Absolutely, yeah. That's a really good, yeah. I mean, everything we do is off menu, I would say.
Yeah.
You know, certainly my experience over the years is, you kind of, when I go in to do an assessment or a first session with someone, I'll have all my tools and my toolbox, and I'll be like, this is, we have a process to go through to at least start to assess. And every time you're like, throw that out. That we've got to think of something else. That's great. It should be like that.
Are there certain parts of the brain that you see more impacted than others for people that need your service?
So a lot, generally, predominantly, we work within sort of frontal injuries, because obviously, depending on the type of injury, if you've got those sort of high speed injuries, or you've got falls or diffuse damage, that movement in the brain, because of the way the skull is rather foolishly made, with the inside of the front of the skull being rougher than the rest of the skull. The damage that you see just from movement to the frontal areas is often more marked there. So certainly mine is generally probably 70% frontal injury, which of course is where our higher level functioning sits, personality, executive function, lots more things. So that's where all the complexity happens too.
And is this a inpatient or an outpatient program?
Outpatient, so I work in the community. So it tends to be when people have, if they've been fortunate enough to be in an acute rehab setting and then they return home, that's where we tend to come in. But obviously there's lots of people who miss that. So certainly in the UK, we've had lots of cuts to our services. There's lots of the inpatient settings that have been shut down because of funding. The NHS is on its knees. All the funding that we've had in the community, you can wait 18 to 24 months to be seen in a community neuro rehab team. So the majority of clients that I work with at my main business are funded by compensation claims. So we kind of call them the gold packages, where they throw everything at it because there's a claim. But there's so many, and that's where I do my charity trustee work and the brain injury therapist online work, is the people that don't have that, that don't have these big teams. Some teams I work with will have, and this is where people are like, wow, these people get so much, that we'll have psychologist, neuropsychologist, neuropsychiatrist, occupational therapist, speech and language therapist, specialist personal trainer, endocrinologist. The list goes on, which is an amazing thing, but also very overwhelming from a therapy input as well. But most people don't have that. If you've got a concussion or you've had an injury through something where there's no ability to have a claim, you're not going to be able to access much.
Wow. Yeah, we're complaining over here if we have to wait a couple of weeks to get in to see somebody.
Oh, it's bad here.
Wow.
It's really bad now.
I had no idea.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, people presume because we have the wonderful NHS that the NHS runs well. It's an amazing service, but it's on its knees. We have another group that I'm part of called UKBIF, which is the United Kingdom Acquired Brain Injury Forum. They have reformed a parliamentary group to build awareness and get the government to look heavily at what the needs of individuals with brain injuries are, because we are falling very, very short of what is needed. And what that means is that people come out of hospital and back home much sooner than they should, because there's nowhere for them to go.
Wow. So do you see that it's like a slower recovery rate because of the wait that people have to go through to get the therapy they need?
Can be. Yeah, can be. Certainly, if I come in and start working with someone in what we call a transitional phase, where they're coming out of the setting and back home, your outcomes are going to be better than when we might come in 2-3 years later, because in that 2 or 3 years of nothing, your kind of neuroplasticity and neural repair is still happening, but not in a focused rehabilitative manner. So it's not focused, and it's not as good. And what I often find is people they just bumble along in that 2 or 3 years, and through no fault of their own, get into quite bad habits because they don't know what else to be doing. Fatigue is really high, task attainment is low, motivation is low, and then you come in kind of three years later and say, right, we've got all these things to now do: strategies, education, training, occupational therapy. That's really hard for them to find that motivation at that point.
Yeah, I could see that. I would imagine that really weighs heavy on their brains too. I mean, they're not their brains, their mental well-being.
Yeah, and those around them, because obviously, we talk a lot, don't we, about the impact on families and families not understanding. But when families do understand the changes in their loved one, particularly if it's frontal and you've got personality changes and mood changes, the burden on the family becomes huge, and then their mental health and well-being is compromised, and their ability to then be able to manage the changes in the individual is really hard. And it's it is the ripple effect of brain injury. It's not just about the person,
Mm-hmm.
it's everything around it. It's the children, it's the workplaces, it's the loved ones, it's everything. And that's what we see a lot. And that's sadly, I think the statistics now are that 80% of marriages end in divorce post brain injury, which is huge and really sad. And it shouldn't be like that if people are getting the right support and families and are being educated too.
Yeah, I knew that the percentage was high, but I didn't realize it was that high.
Yeah, that's really
Yeah,
high.
That blew
it's
my
really high.
mind.
It's crazy.
I never knew that people were getting divorced over this until I joined the support groups, and so many people reached out and said, "Oh yeah, we were married for 30 years, and they couldn't take it anymore, and they left."
Yeah, and it doesn't need to be like that. We work a lot within families because we work in people's homes. It's really intrusive, right? We're going in and we're in that family dynamic, and it can't be done without having to work with the family and to support them and to educate them as well. And it's a lot of family members will say to us, especially the clients that are kind of the more, so when I say severe end of brain injury, I mean cognitive severe brain injury, which
Yeah.
which has severe cognitive impairments rather than kind of physical impairments.
Mhm.
The thing we hear often from families is like, it's like they're still here, but a different person is in their body. They look the same, but they're not Frank anymore. They're just, and I didn't marry this one, didn't
Yeah.
marry this version. And how do I learn to love this person? Because I still love the person and they're going through a grief process as well. And it's so complex and it's really difficult.
Hmm. I think that's the thing that a lot of people forget about is it doesn't just impact the person that got the injury. We go through a grieving period ourselves of missing the old person.
Yeah.
But I mean, even as a brain injury survivor, we forget that our spouses, our family members, our friends, they're also going through the same thing because they miss the old person.
Yeah, and you could, I just watch it happen so often. There'll be little sort of comments, and it's just, of course, the spouse doesn't have the brain injury, but they're still experiencing it in a different way. And so often you see, well, you don't understand what I'm going through, and then of course the spouse says, well, you don't understand what I'm going through, and you can just see this kind of tennis match of, and that's why communication is so key. Communication and education for families, it's so needed and so lacking.
Yeah, I can definitely see that. Ashley, do you have any other questions you wanted to ask?
I don't think so. I just appreciate you taking the time out to talk to us.
Oh, I love it.
Yeah.
Anytime, I love talking about it. It's just so important. Obviously we're in brain injury awareness month, week, whatever it now is. It changes. And it's just so important that people are more aware of kind of the impact, isn't it? And sort of the amount of people living with brain injury, the impact of it, that it affects everybody differently. And that ripple effect, and that there needs to be better services.
Yeah, that's one of the biggest reasons why we wanted to start this podcast was the lack of awareness out there. People hear brain injury like, "Oh, you look better, you're fine now."
Oh, you
No,
look fine.
yeah, that's the worst thing you
Yeah.
can say to a brain injury survivor.
Oh, I know. And again, it's just, the thing is, it's not their fault, is it? It's just ignorance. I've worked in it for 20 years. There's nothing, I still, hear it all the time. And it isn't, I don't think people are doing it intentionally. They mean well, but it's just, again, it's ignorance and lack of understanding.
Yeah.
I think people think, they hear brain injury and they think it's the likes of, people in semi-vegetative states in
Hmm.
hospital, and that's what brain injury is. But I mean, it's here we call it like a silent epidemic, because there's just so many people walking around looking perfectly fine,
Hmm.
but really aren't. And yeah, so it's important. So yeah, keep up the good work.
Thank you. Yes, I think the big issue with the ignorance, getting back to the ignorance that you were talking about, is a lot of people get their education from TV shows. in all the
Mm.
TV shows, some of the brainer, they got the bandage over their head, and I have amnesia. I don't know who you are. And I've not found
Yeah.
one person that's had amnesia yet. I'm not saying that they're not
Yeah.
out there, but
Yeah. Yeah.
yeah, I mean, TV really plays a big role and feeds into the ignorance of what a brain injury is.
Yeah. Yeah. Absolutely. I mean, yeah, there's very few, what I would say, accurate movies out there and things that show that. But certainly, yeah, it's I don't think it's people being intentionally like that. But you,
Yeah.
like I said right at the beginning, you don't know what you don't know.
Yeah. You're exactly right. Yeah. Thank you so much for spending time with us today. It was great to meet you and to get to know you. And
And you?
you keep up your good work as well. So, yeah,
Well,
thanks
I
for
will see
reaching
you
out to us.
online.
Absolutely.
I will see you online, I'm sure. And,
Yes.
anytime you want to talk about a topic, I am here.
All right.
Now that I know what time it is there.
Yeah. Yeah. uh, I have no closing thoughts because this was a great interview. Ashley, is there anything you'd like to close with?
Thank you, everybody, and have a good night.
Bye.